Hello, welcome back. This is Christian Paul, and today I'm going to talk about the economic growth that some of the countries, especially in Latin America, have experienced during 2025. And I'm going to tell you some of the key points to understand this economic growth, and not only that, to understand some of the things that have been happening in these last years and why we are living what we are living and how we can put actually an interesting comment and perspective about 2025. So let me start with one of the most controversial countries. Well, controversial for some people, right? Uh, but an example for many other countries in the region and in the world. This is the case of El Salvador. El Salvador, as you probably know, has been accused of many things, as being a dictatorship and all of that. Nonetheless, you have to remember that in El Salvador, 85% of people voted for Nayib Bukele, and not only that 85% of people voted for him, but you can actually tell that people are happy, people are actually living in a peaceful time, and more than that, now that the crime has been solved in these last 8 years, now they are experiencing an economic growth that actually reminds me of some of the cases in Asia, probably Singapore, probably also South Korea. They took the main years of this economic change towards capitalism and towards free markets, but the first years were a cleansing of the immorality, a cleansing of corruption, a cleansing also of one of the most horrific elements that we have in our countries, which is the consumption of drugs and the drug cartels, which finances governments like it happened with Venezuela, as it's happening with other countries, influencing the politics in Colombia, influencing the politics in Ecuador, in other countries like Mexico. So this is a special point of reference, because El Salvador first cleansed the violence and then cleansed also the drug trafficking in the country, and now they are experiencing an economic growth, which is very interesting. So as you can see, let me show you. As you can see here, this is the homicide rates in selected Latin America and Caribbean countries 2024. The numbers for 2025 will appear probably in these coming weeks. But as you can see here, the most or the country that records the most homicide rates is Haiti, then Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, my beautiful Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, and so on. And if you go to the end of the list, there you go, El Salvador, with 1.9 being the rate of the number of homicides per 100,000 inhabitants, which means that what Nayib Bukele has been saying in these last years is true. Not only is the most secure country in Latin America, now has become the most secure country in the Western Hemisphere. That's amazing. That's really amazing. Now, if you see what's happening with their economic growth, and let me show you here for 2025, the economic growth for Q2, this is an interannual growth, meaning that if you take the second quarter, how much has the country growth in the same period compared to last year, so compared to 2024. And for the second quarter, El Salvador has growth 4.10%. That's amazing, amazing compared to other countries, which we're going to actually see, which are growing in 2% or less than 2%. So El Salvador is growing at the rate of that doubles the rate of these other countries. In the third quarter, 5.10%, and probably for the fourth quarter, the numbers will come in these coming weeks. It's going probably to be the same, 5%, which means that El Salvador, in an average, if you can see here, the first quarter 2.44, second quarter 4%, third quarter 5%. So you can probably expect an annual growth 2025 of probably a 4%, which is, as I said, amazing. So we have clients first, the crime. They have second, cleanse the street of drug trafficking, and now they're growing and growing fast. And in the case of El Salvador, you can find some specific changes in the policy, in the economic policy. They have opened, now that they have security, they have opened the markets for international investments and also private investments. But something very important, probably the most amazing change that it has had is the change in public expenditure, reducing the current expenditure and increasing in the capital expenditure. You can see that with the government expanding in many specific areas, like markets for people, like bridges, like schools, and so on, but for specific purposes, meaning health and education, corresponding to the elements that have their highest correspondence and correlation with economic growth, and leaving the rest for the free market. That's a very common, I would say, common policy within liberal states, so that the economic growth, especially through the force of the private sector, and having the public sector not to increasing offices and ministers or increasing its presence in every aspect of the economic area, no, but focusing their expenditure on some specific elements, as I said, especially health, the health sector, and the education sector. So El Salvador has been doing that, and actually one of the most amazing things, we knew this in previous appearances of President Nayib Bukele, but now it's more and more obvious his relationship with religion and how much he actually considers, especially the Protestant perspective of Christianity. And if you don't know, in the previous two inaugurational days, he has invited one of the most known Protestant speaker in Latin America. His name is the Argentinian preacher. I'm forgetting the name right now. Let me actually find it here. It's a very, very known preacher in Latin America. So give me just 1 second. How can I forget his name? Oh yeah, Dante Gebel. Yes, Dante Gebel was in El Salvador for the inauguration days in the two previous inauguration days, and he was not only preaching, he was blessing El Salvador, but not only like as a public affair issue, but a real issue. And now you can, I'm gonna show you, this is an appearance that happened the 20th of January 2026, so just some days ago. In this appearance, President Nayib Bukele is telling depressed that at the beginning of his government he wasn't quite sure what he was doing, and he wasn't quite sure if it actually was going to work, and that him and the cabinet started praying and actually putting God first and asking God to bless the programs and actually to bless the ideas that they have. And after many of the decisions that they had to make, they started seeing that less and less people were being killed and that the programs were actually working. So let me show you just 2 minutes of his public speech.
Se unieron en una oración
And
hacia el
I'll
Creador.
tell you what he
En
said.
su mensaje, el presidente Nayib Bukele se refirió al milagro que alcanzó El Salvador, venciendo la criminalidad que imperó por años.
Le pedimos a Dios por guía, le pedimos sabiduría, pero también le pedimos
We were asking God for guidance. We were asking God for wisdom.
que las bajas humanas fueran mínimas.
That the number of dead people were less and less every time.
No hubo ninguno.
After some time, there were non-civilian deaths.
Nuestra guerra contra las pandillas no tuvo una tan sola baja civil.
Our war against these gangs did not produce civilian deaths.
Y al final, la prueba de que Dios cuidó nuestro plan es
At the end, the proof that God was leading our plan
que funcionó.
is
Y
that
es que
it
no
worked.
murió ningún civil.
No civilian was dead.
Que pasamos de ser el país más peligroso del mundo
We were the most horrific country in the world with the most fatalities
al país más seguro de todo este hemisferio.
to the most secure country in this hemisphere.
Y no hay nadie que pueda venir a explicar cómo pasó de otra
No one can really explain what happened here.
manera que no sea un milagro.
This was a miracle. And this was a day, actually, you can see here, a day for prayer. The first breakfast, national breakfast for prayer in El Salvador. And I was telling you that during his inauguration day, Dante Gebel, let me just show you here, one of the most famous preachers from Argentina. He lives in the States. He's been living in the States for many years. How he was actually giving not only the preaching but blessing El Salvador. Okay, so let me show you very quickly.
If you're an illegal alien, this runway is your future because you're headed home. I'm Christine O.
Skip this part. And there you
Asimismo,
go.
el doctor pastor Dante Gebel dirigirá una oración al Creador.
So there you go. He's Dante Gebel, one of the most famous preachers from Latin America that lives in the States, in California, and he was giving the inaugurational day. But let me tell you something. This is not only a public relation issue where they have to show some famous preacher. No, the relationship that Nayib Bukele, the president, has with religion, especially with Christianity and especially with Protestants, is real and is truthful, not because of only these appearances, but in many instances he has talked about these issues. You can tell that he reads the word, and not only that, you can tell that there is a special fear of the Lord in everything he does. So let me show you very quickly what this pastor is saying during the inauguration day.
Primera dama,
First Lady,
ciudadanos salvadoreños, muy buenos días.
dear people from
En la
Salvador,
víspera de esta nueva temporada en El Salvador, me gustaría pedirles que tengan a bien, independientemente del credo que profesemos cada quien, inclinar nuestras cabezas en oración como señal de reverencia.
I'm asking you to bow down, especially spiritually, and follow the prayer for this
Dice la
country.
Biblia, si mi pueblo se humilla y ora
The Bible says that if my people humbles itself
y busca mi rostro,
and looks for me,
se arrepiente de su mala conducta,
regrets its evil
escucharé desde el
doings,
cielo, perdonaré sus pecados.
I will forgive their sins and I will
Así que
heal
hoy
their
pedimos la
lands.
bendición para el presidente,
And we ask for the blessing for the
miembros del
president,
gabinete,
his family,
la Asamblea Legislativa, el
cabinet,
Tribunal Supremo y
the
todos
National
los que son
Assembly,
responsables
and all the
en el liderazgo de
responsible
esta
ones
nación.
in this
Y ahora,
nation.
República de El Salvador,
Salvador,
me gustaría volver a bendecirte
I
con
bless
esa
you
promesa que Dios le
with
diera
the
a
promise
Moisés y a su
of the
pueblo.
Lord to his
Si
people.
ustedes
If you
obedecen los mandamientos que les he dado,
obey
serán el pueblo favorito de toda la
my
tierra.
commandments, I will bless you.
Recibirán siempre los milagros de Dios que mencionó el presidente hace
You
un
will
rato.
receive all the miracles
Dios
of
los
the Lord.
bendecirá donde quiera que vayan.
The Lord will bless
En
you
el campo
everywhere
y
you
en la
will
ciudad.
go. In the field
Bendecirá
and
a
in
sus
the
hijos,
city.
a sus cosechas,
He will bless your
ganados,
children,
y
your
todo lo
fields,
que esta tierra produzca.
and
Dios
everything you
bendecirá
produce.
vuestros hogares, en los
He will
viajes.
bless your
Serán
homes.
muy felices en este país en el cual nacieron. Nunca le faltará alimentos. Siempre
You will never
tendrán pan en
lack
la mesa.
anything.
Dios le dará a El Salvador victoria sobre sus
He will
enemigos.
give El Salvador victory. Okay, very good. That was very interesting. It was actually very touching. I remember that day because I was actually there. I mean, I was listening live to the preaching and to the inauguration. This was the last one. It was an amazing one. And just remembering that day was very, very beautiful. Okay, so that's the economic growth from El Salvador. Let me show you now the economic growth of Argentina for 2025. So we have the economic growth for Argentina 2025. I already explained the quota, so quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. That means the trimesters, meaning that how much has this country's growth has compared to the same period of the year in the last year. Okay, so we have for quarter 3 6.5. That's amazing. For quarter 2, for quarter 3 we have 3.5, and probably for quarter 4 we'll have something like 4%, which in general puts Argentina as the country that hypothetically would have grown the most during last year. So that's an amazing growth. And if you remember the president of Argentina, President Milei, who is very controversial, especially for the progressives, because they can't handle some president that's kind of like a rock star, and at the same time he can talk you about the Austrian School of Economics. He can talk about the principles of economics, and that's really, really annoying for some groups. So that's Argentina. Argentina, as El Salvador, has a very special growth, economic growth, and we can actually say that these both countries, they are probably the countries that are going to grow the most in Latin America. So let me show you two more examples. Now we're going to the other side. Now we are going to the countries that were focusing on the internal growth based on public expenditure. Some call it the Keynesian, because of John Maynard Keynes, the Keynesian model of growth. In Latin America, it's more known as the ISI, which is translated as the industrialization by import substitution, which is an economic model that was already used in Latin America in the 60s and 70s. It didn't work. It was an artificial growth. Everything was based on public expenditure, which in return actually made the public debt increase, especially the foreign public debt increased a lot. So the 80s came and everything exploded with this horrible international debts that the countries had to pay, but everything was created in the 60s and 70s. Okay, so one of these countries is Brazil, with President Lula da Silva. They've been within this Keynesian approach in economics already for more than 3 years. He was the president before. He was actually sentenced to jail because of some corruption decisions that he made. He was let free, not because he was found not guilty. He was let free because of problems in the legal procedures. Anyway, so what's going to be the economic growth for Brazil? Quarter 2, 2.2, and quarter 3, 1.7. And you can imagine that probably in quarter 4 it will be a growth of probably 2%, which in an average you can actually estimate the Brazilian economic growth in 2% yearly, which is half of the economic growth of El Salvador and less than half of the economic growth of Argentina. Another of these countries is Colombia. Colombia with President Petro, who was part of the guerrillas in his youth, and he has admitted also that he was part of the many killings and kidnappings. He's the president because for some reason, especially the youngsters, believe that socialism mixed with drug trafficking is the solution for these countries. Well, the growth for the economic growth for Colombia is in quarter 2 is 2.6 and in quarter 3 3.1, and you can imagine that in quarter 4 it's probably around 3%, which is a bit more than half of the economic growth of El Salvador and probably half of the economic growth of Argentina. So with these numbers, you can actually see, let me show you one more case. That is a horrific case, the case of Mexico. You know that Mexico is being within these socialist programs and governments already for more than 8 years. And now you can see the results, and the results are horrific. We have quarter 3 and we have quarter 4. And in quarter 3 we have a decrement. We actually have a negative growth, a minus 0.2%, and in quarter 4 a 1.3% of growth, which you can see we have two different examples. Those examples that were leaving the socialist movement for years, and these other countries that are trying to get away of this. And now you can see the difference. The socialist governments are getting a rate of 2% and less, and the countries with the economic freedom, and the majority of them, especially El Salvador, with a moral background in Christianity, are growing, and growing not a little. They are growing in a pace that is amazing for many countries and amazing for many of, I would say, of the people that have lived in socialist movements and that have actually been horrified with the results of these movements, and also horrified with the elections and how some people, especially youngsters and these youngsters that come from these universities, that they believe that socialism and these movements are actually the system that will eliminate poverty and that will actually create some kind of heaven in our region. That's idiotic. Putting in maybe some horrible terms, but it's very lame, very immature, and probably also it loses the focus of having two areas of your life: an area which is the politics and which is the public life, and an area which is your private life and your relationship with the transcendental entities, and meaning God and meaning Christianity and meaning especially that relationship that you have. So on the one hand, you can find these youngsters looking for a God, as G.K. Chesterton put it. When you stop believing in God, it's not that you stop believing, you start believing in anything else. And these youngsters started believing in government as their God, and these movements are their God. That's why they get so frustrated when you criticize them. They get so annoyed and they get so pumped up when they feel that you are criticizing them. On the other side, putting your focus on the transcendental being, putting your energy and putting your thoughts and your hope in the transcendental being on your actual material world, giving your best, walking always the extra mile, and showing that you can be prosperous without any help of corruption and any help of dubious actions. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for following me and thank you for listening to the podcast. Bless you and have a wonderful day.